Hello, and welcome back to another video on this channel. We are doing a live stream for the first time in, I don't know, a year or something like that. But I am joined by Warren to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to be talking about this idea, this theory, and discuss kind of the different concepts in this part of the Bible. It is a very interesting part of the Bible. We have been going through this Genesis book very, very quickly, and I'm very, very pleased to be here. So, Warren, how are you as I get up onto the screen, the discussion?
I'm great. I'm very excited to discuss Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think it sort of illustrates our situation in the prefect team.
Indeed, it is a bit unfortunate. Though
there's no righteous person inside the prefect team. So I think it shall be destroyed by the Lord.
Indeed, that is true. We'll see how this goes. Abraham pleads for Sodom. When the man got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised." Then the Lord said, The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous. I'll go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. All right, what do you think about this immediate kind of passage?
I think we can read a bit more down, but here, I think the Lord seems very, very personal here. So it's like, let me go down and it's like a sheriff going down to investigate a case. So I think there's almost a kind of crime mystery element inside the story, prefiguring the later genres.
Indeed. So let's continue reading it, and we might go back in a bit. Then the men turned and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right?" Then Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Then Abraham spoke again, "Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there," he said, "I will not destroy it." Once again, he spoke to him. "What if only 40 are found there?" He said, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found?" He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Abraham said, "Now that I have been so bold to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be there?" He said, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak once more. What if only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. What are your thoughts on this prelude to Sodom and Gomorrah?
It's just such a striking passage. I think it's one of the best that the Bible has to offer. I think even though it offers so many gems, there's the idea that goodness or moral perfection matters a great deal in the world, because there's always the sense, the objections, like, why should you be moral? Why should I try to live well? And I think that's the constant sort of existential angst that one has to face every day. It's like, does this matter? As Abraham said, he's nothing but dust and ashes, and now he's so bold as to speak to the Lord. In this sense, it does show that first, we have a personal connection with the Lord, in the sense that the Lord is not just out there sending out decrees, but we can influence it, or we can negotiate with it, even though it's a slightly bold move. But although, as it said in the prologue, Abraham is a very righteous person, so perhaps it is only in his righteousness that he gets to get away with his form of action. But at the same time, another side of it is, well, even though I'm nothing but ashes, I what I do still matters. And even if I'm a lonely individual inside an entire city of sinners, my single moral perfection still has weight.
I think that's a very interesting idea, and you said a few things, but I'd like to pick up on at least one sense of the idea of Abraham being a righteous man. And I think perhaps the idea of Abraham being a righteous man might not be the full picture when it comes to why Abraham could speak to God. And I think that's exactly what's so beautiful about it. It's kind of like Abraham recognizes he is dust, he is nothing, even though he is righteous, and he can still speak to God. And there's this idea that the connection, the discussion with the divine does not come purely through your actions, perhaps, but that everyone matters. And that everyone matters is so beautiful. The idea that the great and the small can all interact with God. And perhaps the idea that everyone can reach the divine as well.
And here, boldness is presented as a kind of virtue, I think. That's later on it will become courage. And I think it almost gives credence to my crazy theory, the psychoanalytical one, that in other religions we rely on God, and in Christianity, in some sense, God relies on human beings. So he entrusts human beings with free will, in order to and says that, well, I give you free will. I don't know whether you'll use it to do good or to do bad. But now I am relying on you. I'm giving you responsibility, and I trust you that you will do good, even though I cannot be sure. And here, I think it's almost another side of the coin of saying, well, once I've given human being this capacity of freedom and this capacity to act differently and to even disobey me, I've also gained the capacity of learning from human beings in some sense. It's kind of paradoxical because God is supposed to be perfect, but perhaps part of perfection is this being able to be corrected by others. I think it's one part of God that it's very difficult to reconcile. But anyways, there's first a deep sort of personal and psychological truth that one as a parent should give autonomy to one's child, or as a lover, for example, to give autonomy to one's partner, in the sense that if one entrusts other people, then one can benefit from it by being challenged by others, by being corrected.
But would you not say, and this is perhaps where I disagree with the psychoanalytical point that you're raising, but I think the main reason for disagreement is I think it is even more profound to say that God knows exactly that people would do evil, but gives them freedom nonetheless. It's the idea that, and it is through that action which gives humans the total responsibility, and the idea that God knows full well that people would use freedom to do great evil, but still, despite that, allows them to have the freedom such that they have full responsibility over their actions. And they can't just point their fingers and, like the Greeks, and say, oh, it was the law, it was the gods or something. It is that knowledge of the future that gives so much more like gravity to the importance of personal responsibility.
So at the same time, God knows for certain what is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, he endows freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Or
because I think that it really depends what you mean by a free will here. Because I think if I could say I freely pick up this pen from my left hand to the right hand, I know I'll do that in advance, even though I'm freely doing it, because I could be doing otherwise. In the same way, God would know that I'm freely making this choice in the future, just as I know I'll freely be moving this thing from my left hand to my right hand. It's just that God knows all the other situations which will come into play. For example, if I know tomorrow I'll go to school unless I'm sick, but then God definitely knows that I'll freely be going to school tomorrow. But then if he also knows that I'll be sick tomorrow, then he'll know I wouldn't go to school, even though I've freely chosen either way. So I definitely think that the free will problem doesn't necessarily have to force it into our understanding of God needing to not know the future.
I nevertheless think that there is something to this formal distinction between free will as acting freely, although other people can predict what you're doing, than being compelled to do something. But nevertheless, do you not think you're missing something through this definition of freedom? As in some sense, the truly free action is the one that is absolutely unpredictable, hence the kind of a miracle in some sense, a true freedom. And that's why Luther, for example, said that God's God as the being that is most free would act in the most capricious, in the most contingent manner, and it's this absolute contingency that makes a certain action completely free. And I think we have to grant that there is a possibility in human beings to do an act, so whether good or bad, but so good and so bad to this extent of making this act free, and that even God couldn't have predicted that human beings would have been doing this. And I think that's the true responsibility. True responsibility isn't God saying, yes, I know the extent of harm that you're going to do, but when I give you free will, but I'll give you free will. But instead, I know you're certainly going to do some harm, but I don't know how much harm you can actually do and how egregious you can act. But despite this uncertainty, I will still give you free will. Is this not the utmost responsibility? It's this certain uncertainty and the degree of horribleness that human beings can do.
Well, I think that is exactly where I would disagree with you when I say perhaps that the free act that we're looking towards is perhaps you're mainly looking at it from the purely human kind of perspective, but I'm looking at it from maybe both the Lord and humans at the same time, because I think that surely if you look at it from the perspective of God, it is that importance of freedom is illustrated so greatly because he already knows that we're going to do evil, but still he decides to give us freedom. I think it is that kind of clause which allows the greatest responsibility and greatest freedom to fall on both God and humans. Though I definitely think that if you're only looking at it from a human perspective, then maybe you can indeed say that a God not knowing would be better, though I don't necessarily think that that completely defeats a truly free act, because I think it is all right for someone to know what someone freely chooses. It's just like knowing the future is different from forcing the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because surely I could know what you're doing right now, but I'm not forcing you to be here.
Mm-hmm. I know, but what I'm trying to say that in some sense we are free in the sense that of being predictable, but there is another sense of freedom to its extreme, an absolute freedom that cannot be predicted. I will agree with you that it makes great sense, or it imparts great responsibility if God knows that we're going to do evil. But what I'm trying to say is that, well, God can know that we will do evil, even though he doesn't know how evil we can get. And that is the domain of responsibility and the domain of freedom. Because for me, I feel like it's a certain wordplay, although there's philosophical significance in saying that, well, we can be free even though all of our actions are being predicted. But in virtue of saying that, we are already admitting that there is a certain possibility or chance for us to make a completely free act. And here I think I'm coming out of a Kantian tradition, in the sense that for Kant, a truly free act is. Well, I was laughing because there was a kid in my math society, and I wrote Kant on the board, right? And he's like, "Someone is called Kant? Are you kidding me? Is someone called Kant?" And then he started laughing, and I'm like, I think that's maybe why British people call him Kant. But anyways, I'm coming out of this Kantian tradition of saying, well, a free act is an act that completely severs itself from the past, and it's almost an act that is inhuman in a sense that it doesn't seem like it belongs to me or it belongs to my history. It's an act of necessity that is a necessity that is created by myself, regardless of anything else that I will. A will that directly determines my action without any mediation. And I think in order to give the proper place for the will, for the free will, as in the will not affected by any pathological, by any empirically conditions, then we have to admit the chance of God not knowing what we have to, what we can do. Perhaps he knows that we're going to do evil, but not the extent. Or he can predict perhaps 99.9999% of the time what we do. Yeah.
But I think predict and to know is different, because predicting something, by definition, seems that he is gaining knowledge in some sense. But to know is to say he already knows everything without needing to predict it at all. It is a preconceived, it is a already existed knowledge, which is then achieved instead of saying prediction. Because I think prediction philosophically would change kind of the nature of kind of how we're approaching it. And just to build upon it before we move on, because I don't think this discussion on free will is exactly completely relevant to our discussion here. I mean, I think it's profound, but it might not be completely relevant here to our discussion. But I think if we look at it from perhaps the importance of freedom, I think would just be illustrated so much greater when we are taking into consideration this idea that God already knows the evil. And I think that would perhaps be the difference being made here. But let's continue on in this discussion, because I think you made a few other points, though. I think that perhaps the other point was indeed just the idea that the interaction with the divine is on a personal level, which I think it's something which is very interesting. And it's this idea that everyone can have that personal relationship without needing to be a special celebrity or anything. It's like, because in a lot of Jewish tradition, or at least, and you could say the Old Testament is Jewish, but I definitely think there's parts of the Jewish tradition which don't get the entire story completely correct. But there's this idea that, anyone can indeed reach the divine and interact with the divine, which is so important. And I think that is exactly what's being picked up here. It's the idea that, yes, he might be dust, but that dust matters.
Mm-hmm. My theory of the connection between the New Testament of the Old Testament is that the New Testament understands the Old Testament better than the Old Testament understands itself. So after the writing of the New Testament, another dimension of the Old Testament, perhaps a dimension that we can now explore and we have been exploring on the podcast, has been revealed in the same sense of, we all know that Kafka has been greatly influenced by Dostoevsky, but it is only when Kafka has written his stories and that's we realize that this is other dimension in Dostoevsky that we've hitherto not seen and only revealed by Kafka. And in the same sense, I think the New Testament reveals something within the Old Testament, Kafka revealing something inside Dostoevsky. The Old Testament, does not even realize that the Old Testament has in himself.
I definitely think that is true, and perhaps we can move on to this idea of the amount of righteous people needed. And perhaps you can look at it from this perspective on, it's like 40. Well, would you save the city? Yes. 20, would you save the city? Yes. 10, would you save the city? And it's like, God would save the city, even if there's only one righteous person in the city, he would save the city. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a certain deontological idea here that a single moral act is more precious or more important than whatever else has been happening.
Mm-hmm. I think that is... Go ahead.
It has always... I've been, again, reading Kant. Although I've been reading Kant like always. In Kant, there's also the idea that in order to make a moral act, one has to first realize one's own insignificance. And that's what we said here of Abraham saying that he's nothing but dust and ashes. That's sort of Kant's elaboration on the feeling of the sublime. For him, this feeling of the sublime is this feeling of one's worthlessness in some sense. First, it's the feeling of one's worthlessness, one's incapacity, one's weakness in front of the immensity of nature, of the hurricane, as the example used by Kant. But at the same time, this feeling of complete incapacity, this feeling that I am nothing but dust and ashes, leads to a direct intimation, a direct connection with the moral law, with an understanding. First, it is this understanding that I am nothing but dust and ashes that allows us to comprehend the immensity of something that is both within us, but in some sense outside of us. That is the capacity to be good and to be just. So it is this understanding that I can do nothing that enables us to do something.
I think that's a very interesting idea, and I think it ties into Genesis 19, the continuation of Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you want to read it? My mouth is dry.
Sure, I'll read it. Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baked bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men. They have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door at the house, young and old, with blindness, so that they could not find the door. And two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry of the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished.
I think we should end here and continue discussing it, and not end the stream, but end our reading so far. What are your thoughts? Because this is definitely a very vivid text, perhaps.
Yeah, it's. I think it's. Oh my god! No, whenever I think about Sodom and Gomorrah, it reminds me of Saad's story of 50 days in Sodom and Gomorrah, and it is one of the most horrific stories that you can read. As in, like, like sex after sex of complete brutality. And for Saad, inside his text, what he wants to do is to write something that is so egregious that the pure evil, the diabolical evil of his writing of the text constitutes a free act, or he wants to counteract goodness, complete goodness, with this absolute evil. And here is Sodom and Gomorrah.
I think that is a very interesting idea, but I still have to say I have reservations about your idea about the truly free act. But I mean, we can leave those aside for now. After all, the discussion we had on the truly free act has not been uploaded to my channel yet, even though we've had that discussion, like, I don't know, 3 months ago or something. But I mean, I think that's definitely the idea that is trying to get here. Like, this is a really, really horrific place. It's like God was saying, even if there's one righteous person into this city, I'll destroy it. Well, goes into the city, no one's righteous apart from Lot. And then you could say, well, even Lot himself is a bit of a morally questionable person. Because when he said, well, let's not rape the men, well, and he offers his daughters instead, which seems to be a morally questionable act in itself.
Yes, but at the same time, you can see Lot was basically saved by his hospitality. He was repeating what Abraham did to the three visitors by inviting these two servants of the Lord into his house, and through his hospitality, he is saved. So I think we can see that what he was doing, he's not entirely just, or else the entire city will be saved, right? But his act of generosity, despite much of his moral failure, including trying to give out to his daughters, this kind of, I guess, slight weakness, and perhaps even foreshadowed before in his split with Abraham. Nevertheless, despite all of his sins, his hospitality still saved him, or there was something redeeming about this welcoming of the neighbor.
I think that's definitely a very interesting idea, and it's something which can be very applicable to our discussion. And I think that this idea of the echoing with the three visitors is just a very nice reading, because I think that definitely is very applicable. Now, I think that there also is this idea, perhaps, which says, well, the visitors came in to judge the city and also went in to protect Lot, because he caused a problem unto Lot, because the visitors didn't need to come in. But then when the problem went out of hand, they had it under control. And perhaps this is a revelation, because we know that these neighbors are kind of part of the Lord, kind of this idea. And it's perhaps the idea that the two men, or the Lord went here and said, well, I'll let it get out of hand, but I will not let it get out of hand so much so that that great evil happens, or something along those lines. And I think that might be the best way to look at it. The archetype of the test is not something which goes completely haywire, but something which is under control.
Yeah, and I don't know, what do you think about the allusion to the sexual act? Why did it directly talk about sex? Why not any other sins?
Because I think perhaps that sex-related sins are often seen as that which is most intimate, but also that which is most destructive. I think that is, to some degree, greatly true when we look at our lives in general, that they are indeed greatly destructive and perhaps greatly kind of evil. Not evil, but, well, I mean, to some degree you could say it is. But there's this idea found within our kind of theories, or our discussions, or our experience, and perhaps that's why they zoomed in on the sexual act. Because it is the most pure thing, sex as the most pure thing, twisted to become the most evil. That idea of the fall from grace.
Yes, I agree. And what do you think about the allusion to homosexuality? It seems to me it has greater significance than just a kind of saying homosexuality is completely wrong.
Well, I don't necessarily think that homosexuality really ties into kind of this text that much. I mean, I think that it demonstrates that homosexuality is wrong, but it isn't in that kind of the most pure sense as a lot of people like to read it as. I think it is kind of this idea of rape being wrong, but of course, Sodom and Gomorrah just takes it to the next level, perhaps to some degree. And now, do I think that even if you don't have Sodom and Gomorrah, would homosexuality then be right in the Bible? Perhaps not, but because I think there are other better texts which illustrate the idea. But I think that this is just one of those kind of examples out there, perhaps. But I don't necessarily think it is the biggest problem.
Perhaps it's this homosexual rape is a degree worse in some sense than this normal rape, in the sense that when you're raping a female as a man, I know it's an absolutely irredeemable act, but nevertheless, there is in some sense that it does follow a kind of natural order in some sense, or you can even argue that there is a certain logic, even though a completely twisted logic to it, compared to this homosexual rape, which is like, I'm using you for the sake of using you, right? For nothing else. And it's not even I'm sort of attracted to you. I just want to destroy you.
I think that's perhaps I think the way you phrased it perhaps gives me a bit a bit of reservations. I don't necessarily think that it's complete. I think it's natural order in the sense that a lot of animals rape each other, and like kind of dolphins rape each other. So in that sense, it's natural order. But I think there is definitely. I definitely agree with you on your destroying
I
it.
just rephrase it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that perhaps when a person who decides to rape a female, in some sense, they're completely allured by the beauty or something, completely
I don't
sexually
necessarily think that
attracted.
is why people are raping people, though.
and then so it's like a sense of a complete sweep of passion, and then it's a terrible thing, and they do it. It's a complete sin, but here there's the sin is laid upon another sin, which is that while you're raping another man, I think at least under the presupposition of the Bible, it's like you're not really attracted to him. You're using him really as a complete means, as in a means of a means, rather than perhaps in the raping of the woman. There's still it's a terrible act again, but there's still a trace of means, a trace of end left in my attraction towards the woman, compared to the homosexual rape, which is I don't care about you. I just want to use your hole.
Mm-hmm. But perhaps you can suggest that the situation is perhaps the idea that at least with kind of when you're having homosexual rape, is that there is actually no possible sense of like pregnancy or no sense of kind of like at least birth or light coming from it on the other side. Not to say that it is very good when it is a female either. That's like not to be accepted, because I think there's this idea, or at least an accepted idea, that humans are greater than animals. Because if you don't accept that kind of Christian presupposition, then you kind of reach the idea that if humans are just animals, then surely rape just becomes kind of just part of the natural order, as you said previously, or something along those lines. So I definitely think that there's something there, and I want to make it very clear that this perhaps isn't directly about homosexuality being wrong, though I'm not saying homosexuality is right either, but I'm just saying that this is perhaps not the most telling passage that you look to when you're looking whether homosexuality is right or wrong. And I think we could carry on, because I think we shouldn't get caught up too much about this situation, and I think what is very appropriate here is that the men tell Lot to escape, and I could read it. Hence, it says the two men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, daughters?" Okay, apart from joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you'll be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the men grasped his hands and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them to safety out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, do not look back, do not stop anywhere in the plain, flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me by sparing my life. But I cannot flee to the mountains, the disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small, let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he stood before the Lord. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, towards all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot lived. What are your thoughts on this passage?
It's a great passage. There's the sense that Lot and many people who were told that catastrophe will happen do not actually act on it, or believes that it's a joke. And at the same time, there's Lot's wife just looked back at Sodom, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So in this sense of once you're given an opportunity, you really one has to completely sever one's ties to the past in some sense, or else one is implicated if one doesn't cut it off completely.
I think this idea of them turning back is a very interesting idea. One of it you could say is just purely just disobeying God when God tells you don't look back. But perhaps there's also this idea, which, as you said, that to escape the past or to escape that sinful past is you have to fully separate yourself from it. Otherwise, you'll always be doomed to repeat it if you want to kind of keep half of it, for example.
Yeah. So it's an absolute act rather than a kind of, yes, I'll balance it around. I don't want to die, but I kind of enjoy my life inside a sinful city. So no, you have to sort of get out completely, perhaps. And it also reminds me of the, the myth of not Oedipus of the flute player who sort of goes down into hell and then looks back at his wife, and then his wife disappears. You know the myth of. So I don't know. It's just a very strange parallel that somehow this gaze, and there's also the idea that where one looks at is the place that one directs one's attention towards. So this look is not innocent, but does portray something of great meaning.
And I think that this idea is definitely very interesting. And I think it's kind of practically true as well. It's like, if you stare into the abyss stares back into you, but if you stare into it too long, you'll probably get caught up by the abyss and it'll drag you down as well. It's like, don't wrestle with the abyss because you're probably going to end up pretty in a bad place. And that's kind of the idea of don't look back towards it. I think that perhaps the idea of this kind of destruction of the city, you have to see it as kind of like the just nature of God. And some people might look at it and it's like, how is it just to destroy a city? But in reality, I think that is quite just to some degree, just to destroy a city. Because, well, if you look at the situation, you could say it and look at it and say, well, they're kind of like looking at kind of the problems of the city. Surely, if a loving and just God lays judgment on a city, it's kind of deserved. And that's kind of my looking at it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that benevolence doesn't mean that you're completely weak, but rather this idea always emphasized that God is a judge in the Bible. What is a judge? What does it mean to judge someone else? To judge someone else doesn't mean to just compliment them for what they've done good, but also to chastise them when they've done something wrong. That's why we always say, like, we don't want people to judge me, right? No judging, because in some sense, to be judged is to expose oneself to one's own weaknesses. Although at the same time, if you don't judge, then you lose the good at the same time. And here, I think God really is being merciful in the sense that he's saying, if there's some righteous person inside the city, then I'm not going to destroy it. However, there really is none. I really cannot find a single one. Then, well, as the judge, I really have to be fair here. And to be benevolent is not to say that if you've done something wrong, I won't punish you. The same with a child. If you as a parent who loves the child too much in this kind of excessive form, and doesn't punish your child for anything that they've done wrong, then what happens when your child grows up? They become a completely spoiled brat, and no one wants to socialize with them. And here, I think it's a similar thing.
That is definitely very true, and perhaps we can finish off the rest of the passage and say, well, Lot and his daughters. Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, where he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters live in a cave. Now, it seems that Lot's story hasn't ended yet, for it gets a bit even crazier. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. let's get our father to drink wine and sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father. That night, they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father. So they got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab, and he is the father of the Moabites today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites today. That is... What are your thoughts, my friend?
I don't know. I really don't know what to say. It's just a fucking crazy story. I don't know. You can see that Lot has not been, is not in the best of shapes in some sense. There's also the idea of wine drinking. You know, Nietzsche never drank any wine, but although he praised the Dionysus, the wine god, it's this idea that, well, you can drink wine, but you have to, one cannot lose one's ability to think in some sense.
I think that's true, and I have to admit, I really don't exactly know how to analyze it in any sense. I just think it is kind of this idea that it's just the idea that the situation isn't as clear as you might think it is, and it is just a bit of a convoluted family situation with Abraham and Lot, perhaps. And I'm not sure how much more we can analyze this section of the Bible. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. But it does make a great story, I have to tell you.
Indeed. It's very interesting. So I think that is...
Oh, I'm asking, should we go on to Genesis 20, or do you want to end it here?
I think we can end it here. We have had quite a deep and profound discussion already. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Like always, stay safe. See you soon. Goodbye, my friends, and I will see you in the next one.